Every morning, he walked into his own home feeling like a visitor, while family made decisions in his name, spent his money, and crossed his boundaries with a smile. He stayed calm, he stayed quiet, until one day the truth hit him hard. This wasn't love, and it wasn't peace. It was control. If you've ever been used because you're the dependable one, you'll understand exactly what happens next. Subscribe now, because this story might sound a lot like your own. I used to wake up before the alarm. Not because I had to, but because I liked a quiet head start on the day. Coffee brewed while the house stayed half asleep. Emails waited, meetings lined up, the kind of routine that told me my life was steady. At work in Atlanta, people listened when I spoke. They trusted my judgment. I'd earned that over years of showing up, taking responsibility, fixing problems without needing applause. At home, things looked fine from the outside. Bills were paid on time, the yard stayed trimmed. Family dinners happened often enough to feel normal. If anyone asked, I would have said I was doing well. The cracks showed up in smaller ways. A comment made as a joke that landed just a little off. A decision already finalized before I heard about it. Money moved from our account with an explanation delivered afterward. Casual, like it didn't need discussion. My study slowly turning into a shared storage space. Drawers opened, papers shifted, things touched without asking. None of it came with raised voices. That was the part that made it easy to ignore. My wife would say things like, "It's not a big deal. We're family." Her parents nodded along, especially her mother. She had a way of smiling that closed conversations without sounding rude. Her father stayed quiet but never corrected it. Silence, I learned, could take sides. I told myself these were compromises adults made. That leadership at home didn't look like leadership at work. That peace mattered more than control. I reminded myself that I was the one with the stable income, the one who could absorb inconvenience without falling apart. Being capable came with expectations. One Saturday morning, I came back from a run earlier than usual, sweat still on my neck, earbuds in my pocket. Voices drifted from the kitchen, low, confident, not meant for me. When I stepped inside, the talking stopped. My wife was standing by the counter. Her mother sat at the table, papers spread out between them. Bank statements, a folder I recognized from my desk. "We were just organizing a few things," my wife said. Too quickly. I picked up one sheet, numbers circled in pen that wasn't mine. "Why is this out here?" Her mother answered before my wife could. "We thought it made sense to handle it this way. It affects everyone." The word everyone sat heavy in the air. I didn't raise my voice, didn't accuse. I asked one question, measured, slow. "When was this decided?" My wife hesitated. "Not long, but long enough." "We talked about it last week. I didn't think you'd mind." Her mother leaned back in her chair. "You're good at handling pressure. You always figure things out." It sounded like praise. It didn't feel like it. I stood there, holding my own paperwork, realizing a line had been crossed and wrapped neatly in concern. This wasn't help. This was entitlement dressed as family duty. Still, I nodded. "Put it back. We'll talk later." No one argued. The folder slid away. The moment passed, just like that, on the surface. I went upstairs, showered, dressed, moved through the house like I always did. Keys from the hook, wallet from the dresser. Muscle memory carried me to the door. Before stepping outside, I paused, listened to the sound of them talking again, already moving on, already comfortable. Out in the driveway, the engine idled. I sat with my hands on the wheel longer than usual. Not angry, something colder, a quiet recognition settling in. Silence had kept things smooth for a long time. It had also taught everyone around me that my boundaries were flexible, maybe optional. As I pulled away from the house, traffic light ahead turning red, it hit me with a clarity I hadn't felt before. I wasn't keeping the peace. I was slowly disappearing from my own life. By Monday, the shift was already noticeable. At the office, conversations slowed when I walked past. Not stopped, just softened, like people had learned a new volume around me. A colleague asked if everything was okay at home, the kind of question that pretends to be casual, but isn't. Someone else mentioned hearing I was under a lot of pressure lately, said with sympathy that hadn't been there before. Pressure wasn't new. Being talked about was. During lunch, my phone buzzed more than usual. Messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in months. Short check-ins. side comments wrapped as concern. Family can be complicated. You know how things get misunderstood. Try not to take things personally. None of them asked what had actually happened. It became clear that a version of events was already circulating, one where I was difficult, guarded, too controlling with money, too rigid about space. The irony settled in slowly. I'd stayed quiet to avoid conflict, and silence had been filled in for me. On the drive home, my chest felt tight in a way I didn't recognize. Not panic, more like compression, as if something solid had been shrinking without warning. At home, the atmosphere felt different. Conversations happened around me instead of with me. Plans were discussed in the open but finalized elsewhere. When I asked questions, answers came polished, rehearsed. We thought this would be easier for everyone. You're busy anyway. You don't like dealing with this kind of thing. I started to notice how often my preferences were described by others, never confirmed by me. At night, sleep came in pieces. Thoughts replayed moments I'd brushed off before. The small concessions, the times I'd said, "It's fine," without meaning it. Each memory stacked quietly, building weight. Part of me wanted to let it go, let the noise pass, ride it out like I had before. Stability had always come from endurance. Another part kept asking a harder question. If this wasn't the line, then where was it? Midweek, I ran into Marcus outside the building. We'd worked together years ago before he moved into a different department. He was older, divorced, carried himself without urgency. We exchanged small talk that turned into coffee without either of us planning it. We sat outside, not facing each other directly. He listened more than he spoke. When I finished explaining things the way I usually did, balanced, careful, he didn't rush to respond. "Let me ask you something," he said finally. "Sure. If this were happening to someone else, would you call it cooperation or takeover?" The question landed without force. No accusation, no advice. I looked down at my cup. The answer showed up immediately, unwelcome and obvious. "Takeover," I said. Marcus nodded once. "Then why does it have a different name when it's you?" Traffic moved nearby. A couple laughed at the table next to us. Normal life continued without pause. "I don't want things to blow up," I said. "I get that. And I don't want to make it worse for anyone." "You already did something worse," he replied. "You taught them you'd absorb it." The words weren't sharp. They didn't need to be. Back at work, I tried focusing on tasks that usually steadied me. Reviewing reports, fixing a scheduling issue, mentoring a junior manager. The structure helped, but it didn't drown out the realization forming underneath everything else. No one was stepping in. No one was waiting for my side. The silence I'd relied on had isolated me, not protected me. That evening, I stood in the kitchen while voices carried from the living room again. Plans being made, laughter, a sense of comfort that didn't include me but depended on what I provided. My phone vibrated in my hand, another message, another assumption. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I opened my laptop and started reviewing account activity. Not with suspicion yet, just attention. The way I did at work when something felt off, but hadn't broken down completely. Numbers loaded on the screen. Patterns began to form. Numbers don't argue. They sit where you leave them and wait to be read. Scrolling through statements felt familiar, almost comforting. Transfers spaced just far enough apart to avoid attention. Amounts small on their own, purposeful as a group. A reimbursement labeled wrong. A payment routed through an account I didn't recognize. None of it screamed theft. It whispered coordination. I told myself there might be explanations. There were always explanations. Still, I downloaded copies and saved them outside the usual folders. Work habits slipped into personal life without effort. The next day, an email arrived from an address I didn't know. No greeting, no signature, just a sentence and an attachment. Thought you should see how this started. The file was old, a scanned agreement from years back, dated before our marriage. My name appeared in a section labeled Anticipated Contributor, not as a signer, but as an assumption. Handwritten notes lined the margins, not mine. I stared at it longer than I should have. Memory reached back, searching for a conversation that matched the paper. Nothing came up. The absence unsettled me more than the document itself. At lunch, a woman from a neighboring office stopped by my table. We'd exchanged hellos for years without much else. "You don't know me well," she said, lowering her voice, but I grew up with your wife's family. I waited. People are saying you agreed to take on certain responsibilities, financial ones, long-term. Agreed how? She shrugged. That you understood what you were marrying into. The phrase landed wrong. Understood sounded like consent retroactively applied. Who's saying this? Her aunt mostly, a couple of cousins. They say it's always been the plan. I thanked her and finished my lunch without tasting it. Walking back, the ground felt less reliable than usual. Not shaking, just unfamiliar, like a street you've taken 100 times suddenly missing a sign. At home, access tightened in quiet ways. Passwords changed. Calendars updated without my input. Meetings scheduled that I heard about after they happened. When I asked, answers came gently packaged. We didn't want to stress you out. It's easier if fewer people are involved. You trust us, right? Trust used as a lock. One evening, I reached for the folder I kept in my study. The drawer opened to an empty space. Not messy, clean, too clean. Have you seen my files? I asked. We moved some things for organization, my wife said from the hallway. They're safe. Where? We'll go through them later. Later stretched thin. I started doing things differently. Screenshots instead of bookmarks. Notes saved under neutral names. Calls taken outside, conversations kept short. When asked for opinions, I deferred. When pushed for decisions, I asked for time. Not resistance, delay. It changed the rhythm. People noticed. You're distant, her mother said one afternoon. Busy, I replied. Family shouldn't feel like business. I didn't argue. Arguments fed narratives. Observations starved them. A week passed. Then another message came through. This one from a number with no contact name. You didn't imagine it. They've been counting on your silence. Attached were texts, old ones, between relatives. Jokes about how he won't say no, and he'll handle it. Plans laid out casually, like furniture placement. Reading them didn't hurt the way I expected. The ache had already burned through. What remained was clarity. That night, I sat at the table while a conversation unfolded without me again. Laughter rose and fell. A decision reached its conclusion. Someone reached for my glass to refill it without asking. I slid the phone back into my pocket and nodded along at the right moments. Attention stayed on details instead of feelings, timing, language, who spoke first, who finished sentences. The order I'd trusted wasn't cracking because of conflict. It was shifting because I'd stopped reinforcing it. When the room finally quieted, I opened my laptop once more and began building a timeline, lining documents beside dates, letting the pieces fall where they insisted on going. The meeting wasn't supposed to involve me. That's what I was told when the invitation didn't come directly. I heard about it from someone else, an offhand comment in the hallway about a family discussion happening at the community center that evening. My name came up only because I was expected to be there. I arrived anyway. The room wasn't large. A handful of relatives, a couple of longtime family friends, and one local advisor who liked to present himself as neutral. Chairs arranged in a loose circle. Coffee poured before I stepped inside. Conversations slowed, not stopped. Slowed. My wife stood first. We wanted to clear up some misunderstandings, she said. There's been tension lately, and it's affecting everyone. Everyone again. She spoke calmly, practiced. Explained that finances had become difficult to manage because I preferred to keep things separate. Mentioned how stressful it was to work around my schedules, how decisions stalled when too many approvals were needed. Heads nodded. A few sympathetic sounds filled the gaps. When it was my turn, the room waited. I didn't stand. Stayed seated, hands folded loosely. There's nothing to clear up, I said. If something involves me, I expect to be included before decisions are made. No elaboration, no defense. Her mother leaned forward. That sounds reasonable, but you have to understand how rigid that comes across. Rigid to who? The question landed harder than anything loud would have. Someone cleared their throat. The advisor glanced at his notes. My wife exhaled slowly. This is what I mean. It always turns into control. I let that sit. Control was easier to accuse than coordination. The meeting ended without resolution. That much was obvious. People filtered out in pairs, conversations resuming at full volume once distance was created. I stayed behind long enough to thank the advisor for his time. Courtesy still mattered to me, even then. The next morning, access disappeared. An alert from the bank informed me that account permissions had changed. Not frozen, adjusted. Certain transactions now required secondary approval. Mine didn't count. At work, a call from HR came just before lunch. Routine check-in, they said. A question about a conflict of interest disclosure tied to personal finances. Someone had raised a concern. Not a complaint, a concern. We're just documenting, the representative explained. Standard process. Standard processes didn't usually arrive without warning. By afternoon, a project I'd been leading was reassigned temporarily. No explanation offered. A colleague avoided eye contact while delivering the message. Driving home, the sense of loss didn't hit all at once. It came in layers. First the accounts, then reputation, then the realization that these moves weren't impulsive. They'd been lined up. At the house, the atmosphere carried an odd calm. Dinner smells drifted from the kitchen. Laughter followed. "Did everything go okay today?" my wife asked. "Things changed," I said. "Change isn't always bad." I watched her closely then, not searching for guilt, looking for certainty. It was there, quiet, settled. Later, alone in the study that no longer felt like mine, I reviewed emails from the past week, cross-referenced dates, noted who was copied and who wasn't. The pattern sharpened. This wasn't a misunderstanding spiraling out of control. It was leverage being applied. I closed the laptop and stood up, walked through the house without stopping, pausing only to grab my jacket. No announcement, no explanation. The door shut behind me with its usual sound. Nothing dramatic about it. The drive didn't have a destination at first, just movement. Time to think without interruption. By the time I parked, the decision had already taken shape. Not emotional, structural. Defense had cost me more than confrontation ever would. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't called in years. Someone who understood systems and consequences better than most. The call connected while I sat there, engine ticking softly as it cooled. "You still keep records the way you used to?" I never stopped. That was all Victor needed to hear. We didn't talk much after that. He said he'd look at whatever I sent and hung up without asking why. That was his habit back when we worked together. Less curiosity, more precision. By morning, the house was already active. Voices moved through the hallway. Doors opened and closed with purpose. No one asked where I'd been the night before. An email waited in my inbox. No subject line. A single sentence followed by a compressed folder. "You're being positioned as the problem. This shows how." Inside were screenshots of messages, meeting notes, and a timeline laid out with care. Not speculation, documentation. Names attached to decisions I'd been told were collective. Dates aligned too cleanly to ignore. A few lines caught my attention more than the rest. "He won't push back. Give him time. He'll calm down. If he resists, we frame it as stress." The language wasn't angry. It was operational. Later that afternoon, I met Marcus again. Same place, same quiet rhythm. I didn't explain everything, just slid my phone across the table and let him scroll. "This isn't about feelings," he said after a minute. "I know. They're narrowing your space on purpose. And widening theirs." He nodded. "Then stop treating this like a misunderstanding." At home, the pressure increased. Invitations stopped. Conversations paused when I entered. A cousin called to check in and spent 20 minutes explaining how worried everyone was about my state of mind. The implications stayed just below the surface. "You've been distant. You don't seem like yourself. People are concerned." Concern became a tool. Silence became evidence. One evening, my wife sat across from me at the table. Her voice stayed level. "We're thinking it might be best if you step back from some decisions for a while." "Which ones?" "Financial, scheduling, anything that's been causing tension." "And who decided that?" "It's what makes sense right now." The phrasing felt familiar. It matched the messages, the meetings, the plan. "This is temporary," she added, "until things settle." I looked at her hands, calm, certain, not asking. That night, I slept in short intervals. Not from anxiety, from clarity that refused to turn off. Every time I closed my eyes, the same conclusion surfaced. Nothing here would settle on its own. Victor called the next day. "You're not wrong," he said. But you're late. Late to what? Late to protecting your position. They've already acted. Now you decide whether you respond or absorb. At work, another meeting appeared on my calendar without my input. Agenda attached. My role listed as observer. The choice sharpened. Staying quiet would preserve the appearance of peace. It would also confirm every assumption already made about me. That I would bend. That I would cover the cost. That I would accept the version of events written without me. Pushing back would bring consequences. I knew that. Reputations don't fracture quietly. Systems resist disruption. That evening, I gathered the documents I'd been saving, opened new folders, labeled them plainly. Dates first, names second. Emotion didn't belong here. In the living room, laughter carried again. Someone asked if I wanted to join. I said I'd be there in a minute. The screen glowed with files waiting to be sent. My finger hovered, then moved. Emails went out one by one, to the bank, to HR, to legal counsel, to Victor. I closed the laptop and stood up, hearing the conversation pause as I entered the room. No announcement followed, no explanation offered. I reached for a glass of water, took a slow sip, and listened as the discussion picked back up, already adjusting to the shift they hadn't noticed yet. Workdays started earlier, not because I needed more time, but because quiet hours left fewer fingerprints. Coffee went untouched while folders opened and closed, files compared side by side. What had once been routine became deliberate. Every document earned a place or got discarded. Patterns sharpened when emotion stepped aside. Transfers linked to conversations. Decisions followed meetings I hadn't attended. Names repeated across unrelated threads. Influence didn't move randomly. It followed comfort, loyalty, fear. I stopped reacting and started mapping. Victor called once every few days. He never asked how I was holding up. Questions stayed narrow. Did this approval come before or after the meeting? Who had access to this account last year? When did that policy change? Answers came quickly. Clarity replaced frustration. At home, behavior adjusted without announcement. Devices locked. Screens turned away when I entered rooms. A new tone crept into conversations, careful and distant. Courtesy replaced familiarity. It felt practiced. One evening, I noticed my email password had been reset. No alert, no warning. Just a failed login and a recovery notice sent to an address I didn't recognize. I restored access within minutes and logged the time. Another day, a message arrived late at night from an unknown number. You're making this harder than it needs to be. No threat, no explanation, just presence. I didn't respond. Sleep changed. Not less, just lighter. Awareness hovered near the surface. Sounds registered faster. Movement caught my attention without effort. The sensation wasn't fear. It was readiness. At the office, an unfamiliar car appeared in the lot more than once. Different days, same placement. Might have been coincidence, might not. I took note and kept walking. Lunch breaks shortened. Conversations trimmed down to essentials. Fewer words meant fewer openings. One afternoon, Marcus stopped by my desk. "You good?" he asked. "I'm focused." That's not what I asked. I considered the question, then answered honestly. "I'm clear." He nodded. "That'll do." Evenings were spent organizing timelines. Dates aligned with bank logs. Emails matched meeting notes. Statements contradicted public explanations. Each inconsistency earned a highlight, not for emphasis, but for reference. I avoided discussing it with anyone who wasn't necessary. Fewer voices meant fewer leaks. Silence worked better when chosen. At home, tension settled into a low hum. Meals shared without warmth. Questions phrased carefully. No arguments, no accusations. The absence of conflict felt intentional. One night, I heard my name spoken behind a closed door. Not loud enough to catch words, enough to confirm exclusion. Instead of confronting it, I reviewed access permissions again. A new authorization appeared under my account, not mine. Temporary, but active. I revoked it and documented the change. Victor sent a brief message the next morning. "They're testing boundaries," I replied with one word. Noted. The sense of movement grew stronger, not outward but beneath the surface. Plans adjusting, pressure building, the kind that precedes a break. I kept showing up where expected. Paid bills, attended meetings, responded politely. Reliability remained intact. Predictability was useful. Inside, the work continued. Evidence didn't need to overwhelm. It needed to connect. Truth didn't require drama. It required placement. Late one night, I sat at the table while the house slept. Screens glowed softly. Files lined up in order. The structure felt complete enough to hold weight. A vibration broke the stillness. Another message. You won't like what happens if this keeps going. I locked the phone and set it face down. No reply followed. The house remained quiet, breathing steady, thoughts organized. I opened a new document and titled it with today's date, adding the message beneath it, then saved and closed the file as footsteps moved down the hallway. Footsteps stopped near the table. A shadow crossed the doorway, then moved on. I waited until the sound faded before closing the laptop. Morning came without ceremony. Coffee poured, keys grabbed. The day didn't ask whether I was ready. At work, a meeting notice appeared with less than an hour's warning. Legal present, HR present. The subject line stayed vague. When I walked in, chairs were already filled. A folder waited at my seat. The attorney spoke first. There's been a complaint alleging misuse of company resources tied to personal matters. No tone, no judgment, just process. I flipped the folder open. Screenshots I recognized. Context removed. Dates rearranged. My name attached to assumptions again. We're placing you on administrative leave pending review. The words landed cleanly. No argument followed. I nodded and asked what documentation they needed. The attorney listed items. I took notes. Habit carried me through the moment better than emotion ever had. Outside, my phone lit up. Missed calls, messages stacking. This is getting serious. Why would you do this to us? You're tearing the family apart. One voicemail from my wife stayed longer than the rest. They're asking questions. You need to fix this. Fix what? The sentence didn't include an object. By afternoon, the house felt smaller. Her parents arrived unannounced. Concern filled the room like furniture moved closer together. Words pressed from all sides. You've embarrassed us. People are talking. This didn't have to happen. I listened without interruption. Interrupting would have turned it into a debate. They weren't here to debate. You need to step back, her father said. Let this calm down. Sign this, her mother added, sliding a document across the table. Temporary authority, for stability. I glanced at the header. Power of attorney. Limited, they'd say. It never stayed limited. No, I said. The word shifted the air. Not loud, not sharp, just present. My wife stood. You're making things worse. Worse for who? No answer came. The old ache surfaced then, a familiar one. The memory of another time I'd been told silence was maturity, that endurance proved love, that sacrifice would be recognized eventually. It hadn't been. A knock broke the standoff. 2 officers stood outside, polite, neutral. A welfare check requested by a concerned party. They asked a few questions, looked around, took notes, left with apologies for the inconvenience. The door closed. The room stayed still. I felt close to something breaking. Not tears, not anger. Something steadier and more dangerous, the urge to give in just to make the noise stop. Instead, I stepped away and sat in the study, the one room that hadn't been taken yet. I opened my phone and called Victor. They escalated, I said. Expected, he replied. This is pressure, not proof. They're trying to isolate me. Then don't stand alone. Emails followed. To counsel, to the bank, to my employer's legal team. Short, factual. Attachments labeled clearly. No commentary. A text came through from the unknown number again. Last chance to de-escalate. I didn't reply. I forwarded it. Dinner happened without me. Plates clinked. Laughter sounded forced, then faded. I stayed where I was, reviewing timelines, cross-checking claims, marking contradictions. The sense of collapse hovered close, like a ceiling crack spreading. I breathed through it and kept moving. Focus narrowed. Decisions lined up. When the house finally quieted, I gathered the folder they'd asked me to sign and placed it back on the table where everyone could see it, unsigned. Then I returned to the study, opened a fresh document, and began drafting a statement of facts, typing steadily as the cursor advanced. The call came from a number I didn't recognize, local but unfamiliar. I let it ring once, then answered. You don't know me, the man said, but I know what they're doing to you. I stayed quiet. I handled filings for your in-laws years ago, estate planning, asset transfers. Some of it never sat right. He spoke carefully, like someone who had rehearsed this conversation and still wasn't sure how it would land. They moved money before they had the right to. Used your profile as justification. Not legally, conveniently. An email followed while we were still on the line. Attachments loaded slowly. Deeds, trust amendments, authorization letters with signatures scanned too cleanly to be accidental. Dates matched the early transfers I'd flagged weeks ago. Why tell me now? I asked. Because they're trying to clean it up, and because I'm tired of pretending I didn't see it. The call ended without ceremony, no promise, no request. I forwarded everything to Victor and my attorney, then waited. At home, the tone sharpened. Accusations replaced concern. My wife stopped pretending this was about peace. You're doing this to punish us, she said. No. Then why keep pushing? Because the truth doesn't move on its own. She laughed once, short and sharp. You don't have proof. I didn't answer. Proof wasn't something you announced ahead of time. By evening, messages circulated again. Family threads lit up with warnings about my behavior. Someone suggested intervention. Someone else mentioned instability. The words repeated with minor variations, like a script passed around. I watched it without responding. Victor called later. They're cornered, he said. That's why the noise is getting louder. What's the angle? They need you emotional or reckless. Either one helps them. At work, a follow-up meeting was scheduled. Same people, more serious tone. The attorney opened with an update, then paused. We've received additional materials. Screens lit up around the table. Documents appeared. The same ones from my inbox, now formatted and contextualized. Questions shifted direction. Who authorized these transfers? Why was his name referenced without consent? Why wasn't this disclosed? Silence stretched across the room. Not mine. Administrative leave stayed in place, but the posture changed. No longer suspicion, now process. Driving home, my phone buzzed again, this time from my wife. We need to talk. Now. Tomorrow, I said. You don't get to decide that. Actually, I do. The house felt brittle that night. Words landed and shattered. Blame ricocheted. Denials came fast, then slower. You're twisting things. You're misreading documents. You always do this. I listened until patterns emerged. The same phrases used to explain different contradictions. The same deflections applied to separate facts. It wasn't confidence, it was repetition. The realization settled in quietly. Their strength depended on confusion, on overlapping stories, on keeping me reactive instead of precise. Once everything was laid out, their position collapsed inward. I returned to the study and spread the documents across the desk, not physically, digitally, side by side, each piece finally resting where it belonged. No single page destroyed them. The sequence did. I saved the file under a neutral name and sent it to counsel, copying only those who needed to see it. Then I shut the laptop and leaned back, listening to voices rise in the other room, already shifting tone again, searching for another angle as the ground beneath them continued to give way. The conference room felt smaller than before, not because of the walls, but because there was nowhere left to step back. Everyone who needed to be there had arrived. Legal counsel on both sides, a representative from the bank, someone from my company's compliance team. My wife sat across from me, her parents on either side, posture tight, eyes alert. No one pretended this was a conversation anymore. It was a reckoning, whether they wanted it or not. The attorney opened the session and outlined the purpose. Clear, neutral, unemotional. Questions followed, short at first, then sharper. When were these authorizations granted? Who signed on behalf of the account holder? Why was consent assumed but never documented? My wife spoke quickly. He knew. He always knew. He just doesn't remember agreeing. Her mother nodded. This is a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. I stayed still, hands on the table, breath even. Documents appeared on the screen, one after another. Dates aligned, signatures compared, email threads unfolded in sequence. The story they'd relied on started slipping. Then came their final move. We believe this behavior stems from emotional instability, my wife said. He's been under stress for years. That's why we tried to take responsibility away from him. The room shifted. Eyes moved toward me. This was the moment they'd been building toward. Not proof, framing. For a brief second, the old fear surfaced. The memory of being told I was too quiet to be believed, too calm to be trusted, that my restraint would always be used against me. It passed. "May I respond?" I asked. The attorney nodded. I didn't raise my voice, didn't defend my character. I opened a folder and slid copies across the table. These are contemporaneous records, created before any conflict began. Timelines, access logs, communications. I let them speak for themselves. The compliance officer leaned forward. "These messages indicate prior intent." The bank representative followed. "And these transfers violate internal policy." Silence spread, thicker this time. Not confusion, recognition. My wife started to speak, then stopped. Words didn't line up anymore. The structure she'd relied on had collapsed. Her father tried next. "We were acting in good faith." "Good faith doesn't require secrecy," the attorney replied. Questions turned, pressure shifted, not toward me. I felt the weight lift gradually, not like relief, but like gravity easing its pull. The damage wasn't undone, that wasn't possible, but control had changed hands. When it was over, no one announced a conclusion. Meetings like this rarely ended cleanly. Consequences would follow quietly, through paperwork and formal notices and processes that didn't care about family titles. People gathered their things, conversations broke into fragments, avoided eye contact replaced accusation. I stood and walked out without waiting. No final glance back, no need to watch it sink in. Outside, the air felt ordinary. Cars moved, phones rang. Life didn't pause to mark the moment. My phone buzzed once, a message from Victor. "They're done." I didn't answer right away. I walked to my car, unlocked it, sat for a moment without starting the engine. The steering wheel felt familiar under my hands, like something I hadn't realized I'd missed. Across the lot, my wife stood near the entrance, talking rapidly into her phone, posture rigid, certainty gone. I turned the key and pulled away, merging into traffic without looking back, already thinking about the next call I needed to make. The apartment was quiet in a way I wasn't used to, not empty, just unclaimed. Boxes lined one wall, sealed and labeled without ceremony. I hadn't taken much. What mattered fit easily into a few containers. The rest had belonged more to habit than to me. Paperwork moved faster than emotions ever did. Accounts separated. Permissions revoked. Legal notices delivered with language that left no room for interpretation. No confrontations followed. None were needed. Systems worked the way they were designed to when facts replaced stories. At work, the review closed. The findings were brief, my position reinstated, apologies offered in measured tones. Projects returned to my name without fanfare. No one asked how it felt. They didn't have to. Messages from extended families stopped arriving. Concern dried up once it stopped producing results. A cousin tried once more, suggesting mediation. I didn't reply. Silence wasn't avoidance anymore. It was choice. My wife called twice. The first time, I let it ring. The second, I answered. "We should talk," she said. "There's nothing left to clarify. After everything we built?" What we built depended on me carrying more than my share. She didn't argue. That told me more than any defense could have. Consequences unfolded unevenly on their side. Accounts frozen pending review. Trust arrangements dissolved. A few doors closed quietly. Others stayed open but no longer offered shelter. Responsibility returned to where it had always belonged. I didn't track the details. Knowing was enough. One evening, Marcus stopped by. He leaned against the counter, glanced at the boxes. "Looks lighter," he said. "It is. Any regrets?" I considered the question while pouring 2 glasses of water. "I regret how long it took to listen to myself." He nodded, accepting that answer without commentary. After he left, I sat alone at the small table near the window. Not to reflect, just to sit. The habit of scanning for tension took time to fade. When it did, what remained felt steady. The mistake I'd made wasn't loving too much. It was loving without limits and calling it virtue. Confusing endurance with strength, mistaking silence for maturity. Boundaries didn't make me colder. They made me present. The final document waited on the counter. A simple form, change of address. I filled it out carefully, printed it, and slid it into an envelope. No signature felt heavy, just final. Outside, the night moved at its usual pace. Neighbors passed without recognition. Cars came and went. Life continued without needing my permission. I turned off the lights one by one, leaving only the lamp near the door. The room held its shape without me in it. That felt right. Keys went into my pocket. The door closed behind me with a familiar sound. Not an ending, just a transition handled cleanly. In the car, I sat for a moment before starting the engine. No speeches formed, no promises followed. I drove away as the streetlights passed in sequence, letting the quiet stay unbroken, carrying only what was mine forward.